Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast.
Last week's episode was the rise of Diego Maradona, part one of our double header on the great little man. Please be sure to check it out if you haven't already. This is the second part of a doubleheader on Diego Maradona. Part one was about his rise from a shanty town on the edge of Buenos Aires to the pinnacle of winning the World Cup, 1986. Now this is part two, how Maradona's demons gradually overwhelm him. Maradona, the downfall.
We'll also discover Maradona later on in life, being a full-blown adult, discovering politics, his enduring friendship with one Fidel Castro, and as we mentioned a little bit in episode one, his advocacy for social justice causes, his, awakening to issues of racial injustice.
Yes, but all this is intermingled with his long slide, fueled by drugs and drink, obesity. It ends with an early death, but in fact, many people had expected the death for years and years and years. In some ways, Argentinians had almost been hoping for him to die. That would have been the emotional climax of his story. So let's start. Maradona after the World Cup 86. And he returns to Napoli, a club in southern Italy that at this point have pretty much never won anything. They're a big club, but a losing club. This is where his glory years in Napoli actually start. From 1986.
His first couple of seasons at Napoli are promising. He's clearly the best player. They get some scalps, like beating Juve and Milan. And in 1987, Napoli will win their first ever Scudetto title.
They've won the Italian league. The celebrations may be the biggest in Italian football history. They go on for days. There are long tables all over Naples where you can get free meals. The city is full of people wearing Maradona wigs. And in this brilliant Neapolitan touch, John Foote, who's a great historian of Italian sport, writes, illegal VHS tapes of the celebrations were being sold during the celebrations, only in Naples. It's like the city's been liberated. And there's even a famous banner at the cemetery that says to the people in the cemetery, you don't know what you're missing. And then they win the Coppa Italia, so they've done the double.
Maradona talks about the people of Naples. He said, the only thing they really care about is football. They put me on a place where I am comparable to God.
Yeah, there's a kind of Catholic cult of him, and he becomes the city's second patron saint alongside San Gennaro, because, of course, people in Naples in the 80s, they've all been raised inside the church. And so the imagery they naturally reach for is Catholic, is sainthood.
And today, to this very, very day, when Napoli win the league again, the first without Maradona, they do it in a stadium named after Maradona.
But the decline is already setting in. The cocaine, the wear of his body through all the kicks he takes, and also his ambition has begun to fade already then. After the Scudetto, he thinks, look, I've won the World Cup. I've given Naples the title they want. I don't really care that much anymore. From, I think, spring 87, he starts to think, look, just give me some peace and quiet.
And he voices the idea very publicly of leaving.
Yeah.
He's falling out of love with Naples, and to some degree, it feels like he might even be falling out of love with football at this point.
I mean, football is sort of holding him hostage. And of course, he is a cocaine addict by now. So the Camorra clan, Camorra, the local mafia, supply him with cocaine. So he becomes a hostage of the family too. And the family is sort of in the sights of law enforcement. So you get all these photos coming out of Maradona posing with various Giulianos. So he is falling victim to fame.
So in 1989, he tries to leave Napoli. He tells the chairman he wants to go. The chairman turns around and said, over my dead body, am I selling my most valuable player and the player that is keeping this city together? They have another triumph. They win the UEFA Cup in 1989 and then will go on to win the league for the second time in 1990. But by the age of just 29, I think Diego Maradona thinks he's done everything there is to do in football.
Yeah, he's achieved all his ambitions and he's bought his parents a house, which is his biggest ambition. And, he's a rock star. He's not a hyper professional like Cristiano. He He's out there, laying his body on the line, partying through the night. And he thinks, well, Cruyff was done in his late 20s. Pelé was done at 29 at top football. Why do I have to keep going on? Why does everyone still want a piece of me? What he does, the way he copes with this dilemma, is he goes into a kind of half retirement. So half the week he's doing what he really wants to do, which is parties in the nightclubs. He's sleeping with all the women he can get his hands on. And then from Wednesday night, he stops partying and he trains to eliminate the damage to be fit for Sunday. And he sort of copes, he sort of makes it work through 1990, but he's getting fatter. And the English writer Martin Amis wrote, "Inside every fat man, they say, there is a thin man trying to get out. In the case of Maradona, it seems, there is an even fatter man trying to get in."
And in this sort of souring of this relationship, which happens around 1990 before the World Cup, you notice that the press, who've always been enamored by Maradona because he's the hero, apply a bit more scrutiny to his private life. So this long-running story about his illegitimate child is all over the media. His relationship with the mafia is getting exposed, is becoming public, which I imagine if you're a member of the mafia, you try and keep these things as discreet as possible. So there's a kind of blowing of the lid of Diego's nefarious relationships with women and also nefarious relationships with criminals. There's less of a sense in which the city, its institutions, its authorities and its media is protecting him. He's now sort of out on show, and it feels like he becomes very, very vulnerable at this point.
The last big bang in Naples is 1990 when he wins the club a second Scudetto. And we can see now that is the last big prize he will ever win. So he's done his job in the league, and the World Cup is in Italy. He is the star of the reigning world champions. He had made Argentina champions in 86. Go back and listen to our episode 1. And he wants to do it again in his adopted country. But his ankle is shattered. He's a fat drug addict. Yet somehow he carries this very shaky second-rate Argentina team through the tournament. Argentina meet the old enemy Brazil in the quarterfinal. And there's this last, I think, great Maradona moment on the field that half the world's population can still remember. He goes on this run through the Brazilian defense. All the Brazilian defenders in panic crowd around him. And he slips the ball through them to the unmarked Claudio Caniggia, who scores the winning goal to beat Brazil. It's the last beautiful Maradona memory for the Argentinian family album. Argentina have got through to the semis and they're playing the hosts, Italy, and will become another Maradonian psychodrama because the country he lives in, Italy, is playing against his homeland, Argentina, in Naples.
Of all the places to do it, in Naples. I mean, this must have been scripted. There's no way that FIFA didn't realise. So subsequently, it's been said that there should have been a change of venue. You shouldn't have allowed Maradona to play in the Naples stadium with Argentina against Italy. It was always going to be a recipe for disaster. But actually, I think it just turns out to be even more of a psychodrama than anyone could have imagined. That's because Diego makes a plea to his Neapolitan Simon.
Yeah, he says, you should support Argentina. He says, for 364 days a year, you're treated like dirt, i.e. by other Italians, and then they ask you to support them. And so he's kind of spitting in the face of Italy, the country where he lives.
And the moment where he breaks their hearts, the stadium is completely in unison against him.
Yeah, so the match goes to penalties. He scores his penalty.
Of course he does.
Argentina wins. But around that time, there's a poll in the Italian newspaper La Repubblica in which the most hated man in Italy is Diego Maradona.
Yeah. And he's also blown the biggest love story of his life, which is his relationship.
Well,
it seems his relationship with Naples.
Well, except that we can see more than 30 years on, he remains a saint of Naples.
He does. They forgave him in the end. But I think in that moment, in those couple of weeks afterwards, he was vilified. Argentina
go to the worst World Cup final ever. They lose 1-0 to a last-minute penalty. Maradona has lost the World Cup 1990, which I think was his last remaining big target, to win 2 World Cups. And after that, he seems to lose interest in football entirely. He's also lost control of his life with addiction. Italian police are wiretapping drugs traffickers, mafiosi, and in early 1991, so a few months after the World Cup, the police announced that they've caught Maradona ordering women and drugs from mafiosi. It all ends with him accepting a 14-month suspended jail sentence and a big fine. It seems that his protection by the club, by the Italian football authorities, and by the mafia has been lifted. He's now, as you say, he's vulnerable. He's naked before the world. He's unprotected. And he finally has to undergo a real post-match drugs test. It appears that until then, Napoli always managed to replace his urine sample with someone else's.
Yeah, I think he was basically getting other players to take
Yeah.
drugs test sampling for him, and it was all known and accepted that he was doing that.
But in spring 1991, he does a real drugs test after a game, and he, of course, tests positive for cocaine. I mean, they probably never found as much cocaine in the bloodstream of anyone. He's suspended from football for more than a year. The club is really done with him. So at the judgment of this legal trial, nobody from the club shows up to hear it. Napoli are just done with him. He flies home to Buenos Aires quietly alone. For once in his life, there's no crowd. Everyone has abandoned him. And of course, what does he do in Buenos Aires? He goes into this coke bin.
Gets high.
And a couple of weeks later, he's drugged up in possession of 1.5 grams of coke. And meanwhile, in Naples, DNA tests have proved that this illegitimate child, Diego Armando Jr., really is his son. So Maradona has to start paying the upkeep for this boy. It sort of ends with him actually meeting the boy and being very loving and charming to him.
Yes, in adulthood, sort of
2003, so
25 years later.
So Junior at this point is 16, 17.
He arrives back in the country without the entourage, without the media attention, without the groupies, and he goes back close to his hometown, to his farm estate, where he doesn't want to be seen. However, ultimately, this is still the world's most famous footballer who's embroiled in a drug scandal. And very quickly, it seems like the entire Argentine press corps camp outside of his house and they want a piece of him. They want him to come out. They want him to talk. He's with his young daughters and his wife. And there's a point at which he's so frustrated by their media presence that he fires pistols at the crowd. I think he causes a couple of flesh wounds to some journalists.
I read they're air pistols.
Yeah, like pellet guns, I guess we would call them. But it also then shows that now he has the Argentine press as his new enemies. The entire media want a piece of him. They want him to explain himself. He is really now in his villain arc and he's behaving like a villain. He's tempestuous. And I guess, as his wife would say, Diego has gone now and Maradona has fully taken over.
He's only 30 at this point, but his life will be this long downward spiral. He will barely play another serious football match again after the age of 30. I mean, contrast with Messi and Cristiano in their late 30s, still going very strong. And Maradona's tragedy, I don't know, but what's absolutely crucial in understanding Maradona is he just missed the golden age of being a great footballer. Because when he's forced out of top football in 1991, it's just about the moment that Berlusconi in Italy and soon afterwards Sky in the UK are going to be pumping TV money into football. And not only do footballers like him become way richer than his own generation, but also the TV companies say, look, our viewers want to see the best players. So you can't let thuggish defenders kick them out of football. So in 92, I think the tackle from behind is outlawed. Generally, there's a huge clampdown on fouling. And so players like Messi, Ronaldo, Ibrahimovic are allowed to display their beautiful skills in a way that Maradona was always having to sort of avoid people lunging two-footed at his head. So he keeps playing because, you know, he is Diego Maradona and Argentina want him.
And he still has a World Cup in his sights.
Yes, 94, which I will be at.
Because 94 is the World Cup in the US of A, the most glitziest, glammiest, cringiest World Cup to have ever taken place. This is football trying to break the US of A. This is new ground.
Yeah.
This entire captive audience of the world's richest country that need to get in on the world's biggest game. And you need the world's most famous footballer there. Otherwise, is it really a true World Cup?
Without Maradona, Maradona's always the main character of every World Cup, so
Exactly.
he has to be there. He starts the World Cup really brilliantly. I was at his last ever World Cup match in Boston because I was a junior flunky working for ABC TV in the US. So I did all the games in Boston, and one of them was Argentina-Greece at Foxborough. And Maradona, he's 33. He takes this free kick about 20 yards out, biff in the top corner.
Yeah.
And he sprints to our touchline.
Oh, that's incredible.
And he leans into one of our cameras, puts his face in the camera.
It's incredible.
And screaming, and his eyes are like 4 times the size of a normal person's.
He looks absolutely vicious. And so ex post, this has been seen as, well, obviously the guy was on something. But the irony was that he wasn't on coke. He had kicked the habit.
Yeah,
He'd spent the
poor
last 2
guy.
months in the middle of nowhere in Argentina, losing weight, training and kicking the habit, doing cold turkey. His trainer describes the fact that Diego would get cold sweats or withdrawal symptoms in the middle of the night. He'd wake him up and say, we need to go for a run because I need my hit. But he'd be in the middle of nowhere. He manages, as he often seems to do, is to get rid of his demons for a World Cup. But on this case, he gets caught, I would say, on a technicality.
Well, technicality, he took a banned weight loss drug. It's like saying you're banned from the Olympics because you took a performance-enhancing drug.
It's true.
His whole career he'd been taking performance-depleting drugs. Finally, he takes a performance-enhancing drug and they catch him.
We mentioned in episode 1 that he has entourages and he has people kind of dabble with alternative medicine. And before the World Cup 94, he hires this very fit tonk American guy who's like, Diego, don't worry, I can get you to lose 10 kilos in 4 weeks. And he gives him this drug. And Diego takes it. He trusts these people, and unbeknownst to him, that's the drug that he's going to get caught doping with.
So he's kicked out of the World Cup. There are tears. There are accusations of conspiracy theories.
Do you see that incredible moment where they've won and he scored, and a nurse comes onto the pitch and he embraces her, but she's taking him to a drug test? There are a couple of medics. They're women, they're blonde, they're young. They come to escort the players that they're going to do drug tests
on. And he thinks, I've been given a present.
And he thinks, nice lady. So he's arm in arms with this nurse walking down the tunnel, beaming at the crowd because he's scored again at a World Cup and he's going to take Argentina to glory. This is a remontada. He's back. And little does he know, he's being taken to the end of his footballing career and a reputation that is going to be thrown into the mud by what's about to happen.
That's really it for Diego in football. After the World Cup 94, he plays a little bit here and there. He has one last stint with Boca. It never lasts long. He's too addicted. Valdano said, he said, around this time, Diego said to me, my ambition in life is to get out of bed in the morning and take my daughters to school. And I just can't do it. It's just too difficult for me. And Valdano said, isn't it amazing? This guy who could do things on the football field that nobody else in the world can do. He can't do the thing,
basic tasks,
that almost everybody in the world can do.
But actually, within a year of that moment, Simon, you actually meet the great man at Oxford University. How do you end up sitting at a dinner table with Maradona?
So, you want to be a marketer. It's easy. You just have to score a ton of leads and figure out a way to turn them all into customers. Plus, manage a dozen channels, write a million blogs, and launch 100 campaigns all at once. When that's done, simply make your socials go viral and bring in record profits. No sweat. Okay, fine. It's a lot of sweat. But with HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools, launching benchmark-breaking campaigns is easier than ever. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Simon Cooper.
And me, Mehreen Khan.
It sounds like a Jewish joke, but there was this crazy rabbi at Oxford. I'm Jewish, but I'm not at all religious, so I'd not come into his orbit for religious reasons, but he was a friend of a friend, and he was this fantastically funny, tiny American extrovert called Shmuley Boteach, who later became Michael Jackson's spiritual advisor.
This is Rabbi Shmuley, who's currently gone viral on the internet right now.
What's he gone viral for now?
You don't really want to know because he's a very awful person. But that's him.
That's
so funny.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so Shmuley, in his kind of religious cult following at the time, there was this Argentinian Jewish kid who had been a bellboy in a Buenos Aires hotel where he had got to know Maradona, I think by performing services or bringing certain goods and people to Maradona.
Contraband. Yeah.
Contraband to Maradona. And he said to Shmuley, I can bring Maradona to Oxford. Shmuley sensed this self-promotion opportunity. Hey presto, Maradona is invited to Oxford. Of course, the university don't know about it, so he's not given an honorary degree, but Shmuley sets it up so it looks like he's been given an honorary degree. Maradona is on stage. They've put him in a gown and they have given him this scroll. So they've imitated the honorary degree ceremony, but it's not an honorary degree. They've given him this scroll which says that he is an inspirer of dreams.
I mean, it's not true.
Yeah. But they probably told him this is an honorary degree.
Yeah.
So he's there. And before this fake award ceremony, there's a dinner. And Shmuley has arranged it so that a few of us each get 5 minutes sitting next to Maradona at dinner. And because I'm a journalist, I'm with the FT already, the Financial Times, Shmuley sensed publicity and he says, you get 5 minutes next to Maradona. So, of course, everyone uses their 5 minutes to bombard Maradona with questions and to kind of really get in his face. And I do too. All Maradona wants is to go and sit and chat with Osvaldo Ardiles, who's come up from London.
Of course.
And he's a lovely man and he wants to see his old friend. But Ardiles and Maradona are separated by jokers like me. So I sit next to Maradona and his daughters are there. And I say, oh, Maradona, Mr. Maradona, your daughters are so beautiful. And he says, thank you. Like, go away now. I say, what about the hand of God goal? Here you are in England, isn't that a bit tense? And he turns to me and he says in Spanish, he says this line, time heals all wounds, which he's obviously rehearsed because he'll say it later on stage. And then I'm taken away and someone else replaces me. And what I realize is this is his whole life. I am now one of the 27 million people in his life who have tried to get a piece of him. And he's actually been very polite and decent. Because if it were me, I would pretty soon be telling people to F off.
I mean, if he managed to get coaxed to come to Oxford by a bellboy he met in a hotel for a fake degree, it shows that he probably says yes to too many things at this point in his life.
Yeah,
too.
and he felt he owed it to the bellboy. They were very matey. There was a lot of hugging.
Yeah.
So the evening goes on. On stage, he answers some questions in Spanish and everyone goes wild for him. There's no kind of English people hate Maradona. It's everybody loves him. I remember the student calls out. There's an interpreter, so most of the audience are saying things in English. The student says, Mr. Maradona, I hear you can juggle a golf ball. Can you? And Maradona says, well, I'm wearing my brogues. I don't think this is the right moment for me to do that. And the student says, well, I have a golf ball with me. So here it is, try. And he throws the golf ball at Maradona. Maradona catches it, looks embarrassed, and then juggles it for about 2 minutes on his brogues. And, the Oxford Union it's just people are laughing, they're crying, they're weeping. It's a beautiful moment.
He's still that 12-year-old kid doing tricks at half time.
He is
to
still,
entertain
yes.
everyone.
What a brilliant, here's this fat adult drug addict and he can do this.
He's kind of sad though. He's like a seal.
On the way back, I read in the Jimmy Burns book, on the way back from that, they get stuck in traffic and someone persuades him that the quickest way to get to Heathrow for this plane, for which he's obviously late, because he's always late for planes, is to go by tube. So they're stranded somewhere and they get on the tube,
on the Piccadilly
line. And Maradona is wearing, a cap, so he's in semi-disguise. But of course, immediately the whole carriage recognizes him. Look, it's Diego Maradona. And all these English people on the tube are crowding around him saying, we love you, Mr. Maradona. Yeah. So, that's also something beautiful there.
In this period, in the mid-90s, early 2000s, I'm someone that has heard about the legend of Maradona. But like most people, all I see is this very stout, overweight-looking bloke.
Stout is generous.
Talking about the hand of God. He seems to have aged so quickly beyond his years because his physical health and his physical appearance looks like a man who's given up on life. So even by the early 2000s, when he's in his 40s, it seems like a nation is awaiting his death already.
Yeah, and although he is beloved in Argentina, there's also a kind of anticipation of his death. People sort of want him to die because that will complete the Argentinian hero's arc, which of course is very Christ-like. Argentina is of course impregnated with Catholic culture, and so the idea of the Christ figure who dies to redeem our sins is very powerful. And if you look at the Argentinian national heroes, they die young. Evita dies of cancer, Che Guevara is killed in the forests of Bolivia, Carlos Gardel, the ultimate tango star, is killed in a plane crash. And then in 2000, there's a car crash and this singer Rodrigo is killed as a young man. And Rodrigo had sung Mano de Dios, an ode, I think that's the title of the song, Hand of God, Ode to Maradona. So there was this idea that Maradona needs to die to complete the story. So although people would be very sad when Maradona died, it was also a beautiful Catholic ending. And the moment seems to come in 2004. He's only 43, but he's lying in intensive care on a respirator. His heart is failing. Enormous amounts of cocaine have been found in his blood.
So he went on a massive bender.
Yeah, there'd been a massive bender. And it's a lot like the last days of Evita. The crowds gather outside Maradona's hospital, carrying candles and devotional pictures as if for a saint. A lot like the crowds waving candles on the Plaza de Mayo as Evita's beautiful body wastes away to bone as she is dying of ovarian cancer. He miraculously pulls through, but I think this saint cult around Maradona at this point is quite widespread and powerful. He's become a sort of folk saint like Evita. He's a protector of the little people, of people who look like him, like this little person with a partly indigenous face. A lot of poor provincial Latin America is people with origins and faces not so different from Maradona. And he is their representative. He is their link to greatness.
After Maradona's near-death experience, he starts becoming political. He takes up causes. George Bush in 2005, probably outside maybe just the United States and the UK, is one of the most hated politicians in the world. So when he arrives in Argentina, he's not going to get a hero's welcome. And Maradona is going to make sure that he doesn't.
Yes, Maradona leads the ritual anti-George Bush protests. He says Argentinians should march with him against the human garbage Bush. Again, just try and imagine Messi saying something along those lines. And thousands of Argentinians think, yeah, I'm going to march with Maradona against Bush. But in fact, Maradona is too canny or tired to march. He prefers to get a lift to the stadium where the anti-Bush rally is being held. And there's a rally there where the Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez speaks. And Chavez at this point is becoming Maradona's kind of love buddy. Maradona and Chavez at one point have this 2-hour meeting. And Maradona says afterwards, I like women, but I left in love with Chavez. So he has Che Guevara's face tattooed on his arm at this point. And Maradona says it was time for the two greatest Argentinians to be united on the same body. And it's a beautiful phrase.
And we've mentioned it before, but for me, he feels like a classic sort of resistance hero. Like if there's a man that needs to have it taken to, he will sock it to the man. Whether the man is George Bush, whether it's FIFA, whether it's the junta, whether it's the global forces that run football, he's always ready and willing to take them on.
Verbally. I mean, obviously Maradona is not the kind of guy who will come up with actual solutions to make people's lives better, but he's very good at expressing the little man worldview. And he also, I think, he felt genuinely bad for the poor because, I mean, he'd been poor until he was 15. He knew what it was like. And I think, like many people who were poor and become rich, he felt a kind of guilt.
Guilt, yeah.
Yeah. And he felt, I've abandoned his own class. And this often happens with footballers. He also, I think, partly because he's guilty about having money, he blows it all. And partly because he's unprotected, his entourage is fleecing him. There's never serious people around to say, maybe you should put something in a bank account. So he ends up, by the early 2000s, he's quite poor. And he ends up having to open supermarkets in Argentina for small amounts of cash and appear on absurd TV programs for the fee. So he swings between being very rich and penniless again. He knows, I've only been raised out of poverty by this divine luck that I could play brilliant football. He feels this kind of guilt and anger very strongly when he goes to the Vatican. So he meets Pope John Paul II, the Polish Pope, who was a football goalkeeper, apparently not a very good one. So Maradona goes to the Vatican and he sees they have gold ceilings here. And he thinks, hang on, mate, stop talking about the poor, just melt down your ceiling, sell it off, and we'll solve all the problems.
And then there's this enduring friendship, probably what he considers to be the greatest friendship that he's ever had, with a certain Fidel Castro, then communist ruler of Cuba. I think in some ways it also betrays the way that Diego channels his values in that he attaches it to a strong man, right?
Yeah, that's very Peronista.
Yeah, instead of kind of going back to the villages and maybe building the wells and doing the work of, the subalterns.
Cafu, the Brazilian footballer, is doing exactly that. He's gone back to his old favela. He's building his favela. Beautiful stuff. Diego
goes right to the top and finds the figurehead. I think Castro becomes that guy for him. The way that he speaks about Castro in glowing terms.
He has Castro's face tattooed on his holy left leg.
And the Castro thing becomes really important, we should mention, in 94 as well, because to this day, there are still rampant conspiracies from Argentine fans that the reason that Maradona had to get kicked out of the 94 World Cup was because if he won it, which of course he would have done, he would have stood in the US and raised the World Cup and dedicated it to Fidel Castro. And there's no way that the CIA were going to tolerate that, so they had to take my man out.
He's also in Cuba because just life in Argentina is completely impossible. Everyone every day wanting a piece of him. And he has this dream, he says, to return to my country and be left in peace. But I think he's starting to realize the only peace he will ever get will be the grave. Now, at this point, for the first time, he starts talking about race, racism, and his own non-white origin.
Yeah, and this is why I think I find Maradona's politics more interesting than just, say, a kind of anti-Western, broad brush anti-imperialism, because there's something that he leans into a bit later on. And I mentioned that in Asif's film, the brilliant documentary about Maradona, his entourage referred to him as the little black boy from the slums. They referred to him as black.
Black in Argentina can also mean indigenous.
Yes. And it is about your racial coloring. There's an entire history about Afro-Argentines who have been sort of written out of the history of modern Argentina for various reasons. Being black in Argentina is not something that was ever considered to be an actual constituency of people in the 20th century. But the way that I think his entourage and his loved ones refer to him as black is because they're thinking about, his coloring as somebody who doesn't look like a white European Argentine. When he's in Spain, he gets called slurs like Indian. Of course, in Napoli, he's sort of seen as part of the general southern underbelly of Italian society. He feels that wherever he goes, especially in Europe and by the European Argentines, he's considered to be beyond the pale, right? He comes from somewhere else. He is an other. And I was really struck that when, very recently, a couple of years ago, when Kalidou Koulibaly, who's Senegalese, then captain of Napoli, a defender, suffered racial abuse in Serie A, Maradona came out and condemned the racism, but said that he had also suffered similar forms of racism while at Napoli. And I think it's really striking for someone that we would consider to be white or of European origin to say that he's also a victim of racism. I don't think I can remember other types of footballers making those types of statements about what they suffered at that time. And I think it's also part of this opening up of his own identity as someone that's a bit more complicated. And he's allowing, I think, other Argentines to understand racial categories in a country that has tried to actually wipe away differences of race.
So Maradona in the early 2000s, he's on TV, he makes these political statements, he's wrestling with his addictions, but he's thinking, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? He's not yet 50. Is he just going to die of his addictions, which he can see coming? No, he has one more dream. He's going to be a great football manager. In 2008, Argentina appoint him national team manager. And everybody realizes, look, he is a fruitcake with a cocaine addiction, but, the guy incarnates Argentina, so we kind of have to give him the job. And he is not a great manager. At one point, they go to Bolivia. They have a team that includes Messi, Carlos Tevez, Angel Di Maria, and Javier Zanetti, and they lose 6-1 in Bolivia with Maradona coaching Argentina.
Maybe it was the altitude.
I wish I'd been there. I would have loved to have seen that. But somehow they just qualify for the 2010 World Cup. So Maradona is going to another World Cup. World Cups are his natural habitat. And he's coaching a team with Leo Messi in his prime. What could possibly go wrong? But the World Cup 2010 will, I think, end up among the funniest and saddest managerial debacles in football history. So everyone in the Argentinian Federation understands Maradona is a terrible manager. And the kind of big boss of the AFA, the Football Association, Julio Grondona, famous crook, tries to surround Maradona by people who actually know something about coaching. But Maradona says, no, I'll just bring along all my buddies because, his whole life is in an entourage. And so he brings his buddies to the World Cup in South Africa and they all dress in these nice matching grey suits. And the buddies are his ex-teammates, Alejandro Mancuso and Hector Enrique. And neither of them knew anything about how to coach a football team either. But Maradona thought, these are my buddies. And Maradona has to pick the squad. And of course, he goes for his buddies. So Juan Sebastián Verón played with Maradona at Boca at one point. At this point, he's 35. But hey, he's my mate.
You've made it. You've made the cut.
Then there was Javier Huesito Pastore. Maradona doesn't think he's a great player, but Pastore is a very gifted mimic. And he can, a waiter will come and bring them food. The guy goes off and Pastore does a brilliant imitation of him. Pastore does the bus driver. And Maradona thinks, how can we go to South Africa and not bring this incredible mimic? Now, Argentina do have great players like Javier Zanetti and Esteban Cambiaso. Maradona didn't really like them. Zanetti is this sort of cold, highly organized, highly professional guy, not the Maradona thing at all. Maradona says, look, I select on pasión, the feeling for the shirt, meaning I only select people who I really like. And he talks about good vibrations. And he thinks, World Cup, no problem. I live at World Cups. At one point, they're playing Greece early on, and everyone beats Greece, so it's not a big deal. But they bring on this substitute, Martin Palermo, and he scores. And afterwards, Maradona, who always spoke about himself in the third person, he describes the scene in the dugout. He says, Enrique, Mancuso, and Maradona debated over whether Palermo or Higuain should come on. Enrique and Mancuso wanted Pipita Higuain, so I said, okay, let's bring on Martin then. He's just totally, I'm going to be my own man. And I was a journalist covering the World Cup. And the best moment of Argentina's matches would be the press conference, because I think they won their first 4 games. And so Maradona's like, I'm totally vindicated.
This is in the bag, yeah.
And she'd watch this game and they'd play this completely disorganized football with then Messi or Tevez would get them through. And then Maradona waddles into the press conference every time. He looks like a homeless person who's found a grey suit. And then, he sits down and he's like, I'm the king, man. My team just won. We're going to win the World Cup. You're going to be laughing the other side of your face. Maradona is going to win another World Cup. And he'd also promised to run. I don't know if Maradona was capable of running at that point, but he'd promised to waddle naked through Buenos Aires if they won the World Cup. So there were always questions about that. Are you going to really do your naked waddle? And he was like, yeah, just give it 2 more weeks. I'll be there, man. And then unfortunately, as the way World Cups go, the further you get, the better the teams you have to play, right? So in the quarterfinals, they have to play Germany.
Oh.
That sucks. So they play Germany, and Germany actually, they did this completely unfair thing. They have a tactical system.
That's not fair.
Yeah, but the Germans, they just don't.
Ruthless.
They're completely ruthless. And so Argentina come out and like, we have no tactics. We don't need tactics.
Vibes only, yeah.
And the Germans win 4-0. The last moments of Maradona at a World Cup are this fat little man in a grey suit with lots of watches on his arms, in tears, beside his dugout in a freezing cold Cape Town as they lose 4-0. Now, Grondona, who runs the Argentinian Federation, he has this dilemma. He has to get rid of Maradona as coach, obviously, because he's the worst coach in the history of football. But he cannot sack the national hero. He can't say, I'm the guy who sacked Maradona. Grondona was a very clever guy. He goes into the changing room. Argentina just lost 4-0 to Germany. He goes up to Maradona and he says, Diego, I'm really happy with your work. You're a really good coach. This is great. And
I have full confidence in you, which means, which is the words you never want to hear.
And then they get back to Argentina. Grondona calls in Maradona and he says, Diego, you're a brilliant coach. Obviously, you're going to continue, but we're going to have to get rid of 7 of your buddies who are called staff members. All your buddies have to go.
What, just kind of some austerity, some cutbacks, or?
Yeah. You're really the genius. You're the main man.
You don't need them.
You don't need the buddies. And Grondona has designed an offer that Maradona could only refuse, because Maradona, he likes his mates. He's not going to let them down. So when the buddies are sacked, Maradona realizes he has to go and he quits. Then they have this big Barney. Maradona says Grondona is gaga, which is clearly wrong because Grondona had brilliantly manipulated him out of the job. So poor old Maradona, he's lost his ideal job. He's 49. He's addicted. What's he going to do for the rest of his life? He has to keep on as a manager. He's going to become a great manager. He's sure of it. He just has to find someone to give him another chance, right? So what you get then is what British tabloid newspapers would call "come and get me, please."
Yeah.
It's one of the great football cliche headlines.
This is when your agent suggestively goes around hawking you to whoever will take you, right?
But Maradona has identified the richest, biggest league in the world where he will be happiest, and that is the Premier League.
Back to England, baby.
Back to his beloved England. In about the early 2010s, Maradona says, of course I would like to manage in the Premier League. The only problem is all the teams I like in England have good coaches. If any important job comes along, I will accept it.
It's very discerning for someone who's got literally no job prospects.
So he's thinking, well, maybe Arsenal will get rid of Wenger or United will get rid of Ferguson, and then, bang, I'll be in there like the surgeon's knife. He turns 50 in October 2010. He says, it is the saddest birthday of my life. The best gift would have been staying with the national team.
Oh, that's so sad.
He wants to become the Boca Juniors manager. Boca Juniors appoint the former goalkeeper Falcioni instead of Maradona. Maradona says that Boca's president cannot tell a football from a rugby ball, and he chose Falcioni, a goalkeeper. I thought they were going to call me. Then there are rumours in the media that Blackburn Rovers are going to appoint Diego Maradona as manager.
Blackburn at this point have just been taken over by the next Roman Abramovich, but these are these Indian millionaire consortium.
Venkis, they're called.
The Venkis. They want to attract maximal attention to their new club, so they try and tap up Diego.
Well, but they might have pretended to tap up Diego, but instead of Diego, they appoint the somewhat lesser-known Steve Keane as caretaker manager. Anuradha Desai, who's chairwoman of Venkis, says of Maradona, he is not being considered, not now and forever in the future. So his dream of managing Blackburn is shattered. But then there are rumours saying that Aston Villa are in for him.
Respectable. That's a respectable team.
He does not get the Villa job. He does not get the Portugal job. He doesn't even get the Iran job. So every few days there's a story in the papers around this time. Some unlikely outfit is going to appoint Maradona. The unlikely outfit then says, no way are we ever going to appoint. We're good, yeah. And so the world's best footballer has become the guy nobody wants to dance with. I mean, he's sort of unlucky because if he'd have retired in the 80s when any old know-nothing ex-footballer could get a big managerial job, he'd have been fine. But by the 2010s, football's becoming smarter, which is fatal for him.
And this is a hyper-professionalised, data-driven, very lucrative environment of international and domestic football. It's just not made for... I mean, he's a dinosaur, right? Generationally.
Yeah. I mean, this is the era of Jose Mourinho, a guy who never played and is this kind of hyper-brilliant blackboard manager. Wenger barely played. Pep Guardiola, a man with a massive brain.
Yeah. These are ideologues and tacticians and, people who have spent their whole life trying to become coaches, whereas Maradona just needs one more payday.
So he's become, in a way, a typical lowly educated middle-aged man who has no place in the modern high-skills economy. He realises after about a year, you know what, I'm never going to become a manager of a big club, which leaves small clubs.
Small rich clubs.
Small rich clubs, ideally, yes. The small rich club in Dubai, Al Wasl FC, appoints Maradona as manager in 2011.
May 2011.
He's sacked a year later.
July 2012.
He then becomes what is described as the spiritual coach of an Argentinian club that I've not personally heard of, Deportivo Riestra. The spiritual coach of Deportivo Riestra does not seem to have any actual responsibilities, like you don't have to show up on match days or anything. So it doesn't interfere with his lifestyle. And he's kind of, after Dubai, he's sort of building a little bit of a network in the United Arab Emirates. And in 2017, he goes to coach in the second division of the Emirati League. I didn't know they had a second division. Are you familiar with the club Fujairah?
Fujairah. Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world. I've been to Fujairah.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, it's a small emirate.
It's a whole emirate. And you watch the local football club?
I didn't actually manage to see Fujairah play football, but I would recommend it as a nice road trip if anyone's doing a UAE stroll.
If you're interested in Fujairah, look on Facebook where in 2017, Maradona, with a grey beard, looking sort of strangely dignified, holds up this red shirt. Everybody thinking the red shirt is it Manchester United, is it Liverpool? No, he says in the Facebook video, I am the new technical director of Fujairah in the second division of the Emirates. These are my new colours.
Bruh.
The club then tweets clarification. He's not the technical director. In fact, he's the coach, which suggests to me that he didn't manage to read the entire contract. Now, my notes say, you say it's a very nice emirate. My notes say Fujairah is a boiling emirate, a dusty 90 minutes drive from Dubai.
Yeah, I mean, it's hot, but it's got nice mountains. There's a couple of resorts there. There's a lovely beach. I would not be talking Fujairah down. It's a nice place to live.
Okay, well, he's been knocking around the Emirates. He obviously also thinks the Emirates is a nice place to live. And for the first time in his life, he's sort of left in peace. So he has a house, his childhood dream of having a real house, not like in Napoli where he has this apartment.
Yeah.
He chills in this house, there's television sets everywhere. The Emiratis sort of mostly leave him alone. And he's good. From 2012 to 2017, most of the time he's in Dubai.
The UAE is a very happy place for like ex-retired athletes to go and settle down. They don't have to pay any tax. The weather's usually quite nice. Nobody bothers them. He's fully in retirement mode. And he's outside of the public eye at this point too. His marriage, or his relationship with Claudia becomes toxic. They end up suing each other later on in life.
They've kind of been intertwined for, by this point, 40 years.
Yeah.
Which is a remarkably long time.
And it's very telling, I guess, of his general life that, this beautiful, childhood sweetheart story ends up in recriminations and legal battles over assets and children and defamation cases.
Now, maybe he should have stayed there, but in 2019, he leaves the tranquility of the Emirates and he goes back to the craziness of his life in Argentina. He becomes the new head coach of a club called Gimnasia de la Plata. Now, Gimnasia do not perform very well on the field under Maradona's reign. They still renew his contract on the 3rd of June 2020. They give him another season because, he's going to come good. But unfortunately, he doesn't. And this is where we come to the final chapter. He was taking treatment for alcohol dependency, so clearly he did not shake. all his addictions, of which there were many. Early in November 2020, remember, this guy has only just turned 60. 60 is supposedly the new 40. For Maradona, 60 is more like the new 160. He has brain surgery. They let him out of hospital. On November 25, he's sleeping in Buenos Aires, and in his sleep, he suffers a fatal heart attack at a very bad time, because this is a country that is collapsing, public services are collapsing, and it's in the middle of the pandemic.
Of course, yeah.
And so I think he's with his lawyer, and the lawyer says later that when they called to say Diego's had a heart attack, the ambulance takes more than half an hour to reach his house. So it's possible that Argentina's dysfunction, which had plagued him all his life, ended up maybe helping to kill him. But it's still amazing that Diego lived to 60. I suspect there's part of him that was happy to go. I mean, having all these addictions, being unable to have a peaceful life, except in the Emirates. He had to cross the world to live in peace. I mean, in a sense, having gone through his life, I feel poor guy.
Yeah. It's a very sad, but in some ways almost fitting end for Diego. And in the final part of our two-parter, we are going to discuss his legacy. A lot of the themes we've already touched upon. The way that he was adored, sometimes hated, but always very, very human and very, very vulnerable.
He was the most beloved of the great footballers. He was the great footballer who was closest to the fans.
And in 2024, we can still say that's the case, because I guess we now live in a world of a very sanitized form of great footballer. We don't know that much about them. They are not as vulnerable or as broken as the Gazas or the Maradonas of this world. So that, I guess, makes him stand out even more than he probably would have done if we were filming this in the 90s or the early 2000s.
Yeah, Cristiano and Messi are inaccessible. They live in these huge mansions. Their appearances before the public are curated by social media. In Messi's case, he doesn't really even bother with that.
Yeah.
We don't know them as people. And they have been groomed to be great athletes from about the age of 11.
Yeah.
They've lived in this hyper-professional world almost all their lives.
Yeah.
Maradona, not so. And I think it was hard for him, particularly that he was Argentinian, because he's in this nation that is on this downward trajectory all his life, that is suffering what his teammate Jorge Valdano calls the first undeveloping country. Once in Buenos Aires, I was talking to this photographer who said, I've been kicked out of the first world with the rest of Argentina. And I said, what makes you say that? He said, Amazon just refused my credit card because it's an Argentinian credit card.
Wow.
So that's kind of the story of Argentina. Amazon has refused the country's credit card. And that was the country that Maradona had to kind of compensate for all this suffering by beating the world in this one field where Argentina can beat the world. And the Redeemer arrives, Evita, Maradona, now the president, Javier Milei, and he promises return to the good old days, but then the Redeemer dies. And Maradona understands this cycle. He says, sadly, Argentinians always need to invent idols to fatten them up. People have to understand that Maradona is not a machine for giving happiness. But that's exactly how Argentinians treated him, as a machine for giving them not just happiness, but sort of national dignity. So in a way, no wonder he escapes into cocaine and later escapes to Cuba and Dubai, so he can sort of prepare for death in peace.
But in terms of legacy, I think we've said that he's given us the greatest goal to have ever been scored in the World Cup.
And the two most famous goals in a World Cup in the same match.
Most famous and probably most infamous goals in a World Cup. I think he has taken on a resonance after his death, as we said, as this sort of resistance hero, as this sort of subaltern figure that has a resonance way beyond Argentina,
Yeah, the representative of the little man, the little person.
And I think in a world where there's more anti-imperialism and more anti-Westernism and more anti-Americanism, lots of Diego's political interventions don't even seem that controversial anymore. He spoke about injustices which just seemed clear and obvious and evident to us.
Yeah, I mean, I find it hard to cast him as a kind of serious sporting political rebel like the American runner Tommy Smith, who has already thought harder about these things. Maradona has absorbed this slightly crazy populist Peronista politics where the poor are good and the rich are bad, and it doesn't really go beyond that. In terms of football greatness, look, he never did what Ronaldo and Messi do, which is you're great every week. You play in the best teams in the world, you keep it going for 15, 20 years, you win every prize going. That's never really what he was trying to do. Maradona wanted to be great sometimes when he was able to get out of bed, when there was a big World Cup. He never really wanted to be a hyper-professional.
So, eternal question, where do you put Maradona in the pantheon of greats? Where does he sit for you?
Emotionally, he is right at the top. Emotionally, he's greater than any other great footballer. He didn't do what Messi and Ronaldo have done, which is win week in, week out for 20 years. He wasn't an unblemished hero like Pelé, but the emotional peak of football is the World Cup. And a lot of World Cup is luck. Winning a World Cup is luck. So if the Tunisian referee sees the handball, maybe Maradona never wins the World Cup. We would still have done an episode on him, but it would have been very different. So there is luck, but because I know you're slightly skeptical of World Cups, but because there is nothing bigger, nothing greater than that, and because Maradona was the man of World Cups, much more than he was the man of everyday football, and because when you saw him, you saw his full personality, which you didn't see with Pelé, you didn't see with Beckenbauer, you don't see with Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo. You saw Maradona, you felt who he was when he was playing. I don't think we as fans will ever have that same relationship with another great player. And so for me, he is at the top of football's pantheon.
So now to our traditional end of show questions where we begin to wrap up. The first one we ask is, what would Diego Maradona be doing if improbably there was no football for him?
I see a route where he becomes a kind of singer, entertainer, comedian in some working class neighborhood bar where his gift of the gab, his exuberance, his charisma finds this little outlet somewhere. And, you go to the bar, he runs the bar is always losing money, but he kind of grabs the mic and sings tangos late in the night, and everybody loves it.
Do we think that he could have been a leftist politician of any note?
I think a minor Peronista politician, it's something he thought about at one point. You could see without football, this man called Diego Maradona gets elected mayor of some small town, and people love him until he's busted for drugs and ends up in jail.
And corruption.
Would you like to spend an evening with him?
No, not at all. Given what his evening's composed of, I think I'm way too halal to be in environments where Diego was drinking, holding court,
Prostitutes.
bringing some prostitutes in later at night and snuffing some cocaine. I think I would definitely cramp his style. If we were in the same room, I think he'd realise he's in the wrong room. But you have met him, of course, with the help of Rabbi Shmuley. If Rabbi Shmuley, who's a bit busier these days, called you up and said, Simon, guess what? I've reincarnated the great man. Come and hang out with us.
Do you think Shmuley has the power to reincarnate him?
Shmuley has a lot of influence, I think.
I would say, okay, I'll go out with Maradona, but I want a very long nap beforehand.
And afterwards too.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. Next week's episode is the first of a two-parter on Cristiano Ronaldo, the son of an alcoholic who will become football's greatest workaholic. Be sure to check it out. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.